Australia has come a long way since the infamous days of the 6 o'clock swill, when drinkers guzzled their industrially brewed beers before early closing time. While beer consumption has been declining for years, so-called craft beers are booming. But some of the nation's smallest brewers say they're being locked out of the most lucrative end of the market.
It's all about using old techniques, but using them with an innovative approach. So it's brewing using centuries-old techniques and methods. It's often not using some of the more industrialised processes that some of the bigger, more factory-based mainstream brewers use. But it's also often giving the brewers like myself a lot more freedom to brew different styles and to innovate with flavour and aromas.
It should be full of flavour. There should be no hiding behind, extra cold, or we use all the natural ingredients, so we're not using extracts or anything like that. It should just taste fresh, and that's the main thing, really. A craft beer should be fresh.
For me, a craft beer is a beer that's made by people who are passionate and they're doing the best possible job that they can. And I think that shows in the final product, in the glass. When you've got a beer in the glass, you'll have something which is, should be mighty tasty and enjoyed. So just make sure you're circulating that well. We're breaking up.
At Potter's Brewery in the Hunter Valley of New South Wales, they're preparing a brewer's mash to make a new batch of pale ale. It's one of dozens of micro or boutique breweries which have sprouted up across Australia in the last decade. Here, they make about 10 different varieties for a largely tourism market. 95% of their beer is drunk on the premises.
Have a taste, grab one, see what you think. We've made a very conscious decision. We don't want to get too big. We want to do what we're doing, which is making great beer and sharing that with people who come and visit us.
But for medium-sized enterprises such as Murray's Brewery at Nelson Bay on the mid-north coast of New South Wales, growing the business beyond the cellar door is difficult.
It's very, very difficult for a small brewer like us, without any marketing, without any advertising budgets, without a legion of reps on the road to sell the beer, and without generations of publicans themselves knowing the product, to get a tap in a bar. And when we do get a tap in a bar in a pub, it's a real target then for some of the bigger breweries to try and get one of their beers back on that tap. And that's the marketplace. It's the market that we're in. We're not whinging about that, but sometimes at our scale and at our size, it does get pretty hard to compete with the big breweries in that market.
Australia's tax system favours draft beer sold in kegs. But small brewers claim the multinationals behind Foster's and Lion Nathan jealously guard their market share. Lion's James Squire brand and Foster's Matilda Bay range dominate the craft beer market.
It's very difficult. Most real craft brewers around Australia can't even get their beer on tap in their local venues. So the shame of all this is most Australians aren't getting given the opportunity to taste real craft beer around Australia. Have you tried one yet? No. A good one to start with is the German-style wheat beer.
David Hollyoak is the brewer for a family enterprise in the Central Business District of Sydney. He's also chairman of the newly formed Real Craft Brewers Association, a group set up, he says, to fight for the interests of small Australian brewers.
The excise on bottled beer is about 40% higher than on draft, but for craft brewers, kegs are recyclable. So if we can sell our beer on draft, we can be more viable and can help cover our costs. It is very difficult for us to compete with the economies of scales in the bottled product. So by the big brewers keeping control of the draft, they're really strangling real craft brewers around Australia.
Chuck Hahn is considered by many as the father of craft brewing in Australia. He sold his Hahn brewery to Lion Nathan in 1993 and is now head of brewing at James Squire.
A lot of the publicans will actually come to us and say, look, I want to put in a new tap system. It's going to cost me so much money. Can you help finance it? And so if we help finance it, we say, well, maybe we want to have, you know, 50% of the taps to get a return on that investment. I mean, I think if the small craft brewers wanted to invest in tap systems like that, they would certainly be amenable, you know.
How realistic is that, though, when they're small breweries barely making ends meet?
Well, I think what you have to do, I mean, we did that same thing back with the Hahn Brewery. I mean, we weren't buying any taps or anything like that, but we brewed such a good beer that people wanted to have it on tap. And if there's a will, there's a way.
At this year's Sydney Royal Show beer competition, the big craft brewers dominated, with Matilda Bay taking out the best bottled and draft beer prizes in a field of more than 70. Judges such as Richard Watkins say the best way for boutique brewers to sell their beer in pubs is to produce good beer.
I don't think it's hard to get taps. I think if you have the right product, publicans will sell your product.
But aren't the big brewers, Foster's and Lion, you know, doing deals with pubs so that their craft beers get preference?
They might well be, but that's business. There's no reason why small craft brewers can't go and do their own deals, their own organise their own promotion, in-house promotions to get tap space in pubs.
Head judge Brad Rogers helped form an industry association last year called Craft Beer Incorporated. He was disappointed that the breakaway Real Craft Brewers was formed soon after to exclude the industry's biggest players.
Whether it can afford to have two associations, I'm unsure. The thing is, it doesn't need two associations. What it needs is a collective group of craft brewers with one voice moving forward for the good of the actual craft beer industry. I think it's detrimental for the consumer to actually see these two bodies almost competing. We were really trying to get out, on the front foot and really bring the industry together. Unfortunately, having two bodies, it's probably put a wedge right down the middle.
He's now working to bring the two groups together, but David Hollyoak says that's unlikely.
Craft beer, by definition, is recognised around the world as being small, independent and traditional. And I think customers and Australians will find it very hard for the big brewers with their alternative brands to fit into the independent component when they're owned by $100 billion companies. So we want to promote family-owned Australian real craft brewers around Australia that actually are independent.
The Real Craft Brewers Association says it'll focus on issues affecting small brewers, such as the need for tax reform in line with the wine equalisation tax rebate, which is worth about $500,000 to small wineries.
Small wineries not only get $500,000 back, but they get 100% of the wet tax back. And at the moment, real craft brewers only get 60% back, but only up to $10,000. And even in our first year of operation, when we were really small, we didn't even qualify to get that $10,000. It's an unrealistic amount. We really need it to be increased to help real craft brewers be viable around Australia.
Chuck Hahn says the case for tax reform isn't new, but there has been some progress made since he began campaigning more than 20 years ago.
Wet tax release is really quite something. I mean, if you look at it internationally, in Germany and in America, the small brewers under a certain level pay about half the excise level. But our government here in Australia won't change that at all. I mean, I tried back in 1989, and it's not as bad as it was then. The GST is only 10%. It used to be on top of excise, we had a 30% sales tax. So back then in the early 90s, we had a lot of small breweries go out of business. But we've seen a lot more come on board now. In fact, we've got about 120 small breweries in Australia, and a lot of them are making some really good beers.
And that's one thing the industry can agree on. In terms of quality and variety, Australian beer drinkers have never had it so good.